This video is brought to you by Incogni. All right, so this is part 2 of my immigration video. I did the first part. It was mainly sort of economy, capitalism, the why of immigration. Why does it exist? And one of the popular comments I was getting was, Jimmy, this is all well and good, all your numbers, your stats, but you're not talking about culture. I'm hearing more and more a common argument that some immigrant groups, not all, but some have very different cultural attitudes to us and they don't want to assimilate into British culture. And people arrive at this opinion through many different arguments that they hear and stuff they read and things they experience in person. So today, what we're going to do, we're not going to shy away from this topic. We're going to tackle it head on. We're going to talk the Islams, we're going to talk crime stats, cultural attitudes, and we're going to talk about some other aspects that I don't think are being spoken about enough. And together we will work out, is British culture under attack?
We're peddling a lie, Winston, and that lie is multiculturalism works. We're a multicultural society because, and I've got to this journey and this realization myself on this journey, all cultures are not equal.
So what we're going to do is kind of travel through the different arguments that might lead someone to this perspective. So we're going to start off with the most darkest, the most uncomfortable layer of this, and that is sexual assault. So we're going to abbreviate it to SA for the sake of monetization, and this argument that some groups commit more SA than others. So very recently, you might have heard Nigel Farage go up on a stage and state this statistic.
The fact that 40% of sexual assaults in London over the course of the last 5 years have been committed by those born overseas. You know, we have to recognise something. There are some people who come from certain cultures that pose a danger to our society. It's as simple as that.
He had this big deportation board and it's clever, right? Different nationalities, very smart. And this claim was also made by conservative Robert Jenrick.
40% of all those charged with sexual crimes in London are foreign nationals. As I've been saying for a very long time, immigration is fueling crime, particularly sexual crime, across our country, and we've got to put a stop to it.
And like, you know, if it's true, it'd be completely understandable that, yeah, if there's a group of people that are doing more SA than others, probably we shouldn't allow them in the country, right? So we have to start with, like, firstly, where did this claim come from? And if we look online, we'll find a group called the Centre for Migration Control, who published this report that says up to 47% of SA in London was committed by foreign nationals, despite only being a quarter of the population. This stat was shared everywhere, right? Uncritically by many mainstream media outlets. And it kind of sounds insane, right? Almost unbelievably insane. The way that the Centre for Migrant, the CMC, the way they got to this data was by submitting a Freedom of Information request to the police, who sent them a load of data showing that supposedly British people commit 2.2 offences per 10,000 of their population, but Afghans committing 74.17 per 10,000. So how did they get to that number? Well, luckily, the CMC, in their blog post, includes the Freedom of Information request that they got from the police. And you can click on it, you can download it. And if you do that, you will see there's a massive section that has been deleted. Strange. So look, we can dig online and we can find the original, and you'll notice that, yeah, there was a section deleted. That section being some notes. In the notes, it says, the number of custody records do not equal the number of individuals. For example, an individual may be arrested twice within the time period. Some people would have been arrested and not found guilty. So if you have one guy that commits 10 crimes, in this report, all of those crimes will be logged as separate incidents, but done by one person. But you know, weirdly, the CMC just decided to literally delete this section from their report, and completely ignoring its advice by counting every single incident as different people committing different offences. So then with that number, you then now need to work out the overall population of Afghans in London, which this report tells us is 12,000. This number from the CMC is completely made up. They invented the number. They just picked a number, 12,000. And I know that sounds insane, but the CMC even admits it. They just say, yeah, we made up the number because we don't have the data. But luckily, right, we have the data. We can roughly work out the Afghan population in London because we have Google. So we can work out the Afghan population, right? In 2021, there was a census that says in the UK, there's about 85,000 Afghans and 56% of them report living in London. And so if we divide it by that number, we go from 74.17 all the way down to about 2 or 3, which, oh look, is very similar to the British rate. So yeah, it was a completely bullshit report. It's complete pseudoscience, but it gets shared everywhere. You hear it. Nigel Farage reiterates it. You hear it endlessly, and it just quietly gets lodged in the back of your brain, and it becomes part of this sort of tower of beliefs that lead people to this idea that certain cultures are maybe more criminal. But look, the Centre for Migration Control, that's a prestigious, well-respected think tank. You know, the media always cites them, so I figured this must have just been a bad day at the office. So I'm sure after getting fact-checked, they must have redacted the report, issued an apology, and oh no, they didn't do that. No, instead they just made more and more of them. A clear pattern starts to emerge the more that you actually look into these alarming migrant crime stats. A pattern of very dodgy data collection that often relies on massive assumptions and just sometimes makes up data. We see it again here, right? The Centre for Migration Control, they came back with a sequel, again repeated by Nigel Farage and Robert Jenrick.
Afghans and Eritreans living in this country are 20 times more likely to commit sex crimes than British nationals.
We know already that an Afghan male has a 22 times more likely chance of being convicted of rape than somebody born in this country.
The CMC arrives at this insane number by using a population size for Afghans as 13,000, which we know is wrong. But like we did in the last one, if we use the more accurate population size, which is about 85,000, some estimate it even to be about 116,000. Both of these estimates are still likely to be below the real amount, but we'll use them anyway. And suddenly that 22 times number goes all the way down to 3 times. 3 times. Okay, that is still more, right? It's a big deal. If they're doing it 3 times as much, that's still a problem. So let's go with that, right? Let's go with that. Are Afghans 3 times more likely to commit SA than British people? Before we go any further with this video, I've been using today's sponsor, Incogni, for a while now. And honestly, I was pretty shocked when I found out my personal data, it was just out there on the internet. My name, my old addresses, even family info. But luckily, with Incogni, I didn't have to spend hours chasing each of these websites to take it down. Instead, Incogni handled it all. And every single month, I get updates showing me which of these data brokers have actually deleted my info. It's honestly great not having to worry about. Having your data out on the internet isn't just about scams or spam email. Imagine you were applying to get a flat or a job, and when they choose to Google you, some random profile that's using your data is out there. Things like that can actually cost you opportunities in life. Incogni takes care of all these risks by wiping your personal data from people search sites, shady directories, and now they've just launched a new feature, custom data removals. If you manage to find your own data on a website and it's not already covered, all you have to do is take the link, paste it into your dashboard, and Incogni's privacy team will take care of it for you. Unlimited requests, unlimited peace of mind. So if you're ready to take your data back, protect your privacy, and stop bad actors exploiting your info, go to incogni.com/Jimmy the Giant and use the code Jimmy the Giant for 60% off their annual plan. That's unlimited data removal requests handled by experts. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Anyway, back to video. So firstly, the 3 times number is still very much likely to be an overestimation. Because of a lack of reliable data, we likely underestimate the real size of the Afghan population in the UK. But if we just go on that logic anyway. So look, there's something you really need to keep in mind. Whenever you hear these very alarming stats about this group of people, there's 1,000,000 times more this than that. You know when people complain about the small boats crossing the channel, what is it that they say about the people? They often say the phrase, military-aged males. Military-aged men. Why is that? Why do they use that term? Well, it's because we know that age and gender impacts crime rates. Instinctively, if you heard it was a boatload of pensioners coming over or military-aged men, you're going to be more scared of military-aged men. What we know for fact is that men do come over more on boats than women and children, but women and children are much more likely to come over via family reunification schemes. So it is very widely believed that the gender demographics of Afghans in Britain is probably quite balanced between men and women. So when they say this claim that all these asylum seekers are all just young men, that is untrue, completely untrue. But what is true is that they are a younger generation. And it makes sense, right? Think about it. Say you're an old geezer and you're in Afghan, the Taliban are taking over. You're not making it a Britain. You're just not. And why this is really important to remember anytime you hear these statistics is because when Farage claims that they're 22 times more likely, or when fact-checked, 3 times more likely, what he is doing is very deceptive. He is comparing a tiny population of 80 to 100,000 Afghans in Britain, a population that is disproportionately young, to the entire British population. The most likely age category for people who commit SA is between 20 and 39. About 70% of the British population are already outside of that age demographic. Migrants in general skew a lot younger. They're typically between the age of 20 and 60. And Britain has a lot of old people, right? 23% of the British population are over the age of 60.
There are some people who come from certain cultures that pose a danger to our society. It's as simple as that.
And this is very important when it comes to these crime stats, because if you're listening to people like Reform and Farage, etc., the hypothesis that they present, like the reason for these imbalances in crime, they tell you the problem is their culture. That being the key difference, right? Their attitudes, their beliefs, what's in their brain is the thing that makes them commit more crime if they do. But academically, if you were looking at this data honestly, everything academically will be pointing towards their age, their gender, and their economic status. Factors that we all know massively affect crime rates. This is what people are getting at when they say that this is misinformation and pseudoscience, because they are dishonestly interpreting data to push their political opinion. Look, we could do the same thing. I could give an example. If I told you that the town of Blackpool in the UK, which has a reported crime rate of 65.33, and then I said, well, let's compare that to Rabat in Morocco, who have a very low crime rate of 29.73. And now if I looked at these 2 points and I said, well, what's different about them? Well, Blackpool is 95% white British. Rabat is 99% Sunni Muslim. The difference in crime rates must be because Blackpool is white British. That'd be insane, right? It'd be stupid. We know it's stupid because lots of factors happened in Blackpool that have led to this high crime rate. You know, deindustrialization, leading to economic decline, systemic factors, the role of the state. There's a million things that you have to factor in to come to some hypothesis over why. But the assertion that people like Farage and Robert Jenrick are making is that the key and core difference is specifically a cultural one. They say things about how their culture degrades and devalues women, and that's why they do more SA than British people.
It's religious misogyny dressed up as tradition and marketed as core Islamic values. It is an attack on women's dignity, British values, and clearly the rule of law in this country. We've allowed parallel societies to breed underground, societies that do not have a place in Britain, societies that degrade women and undermine hard-fought equality for women in this country.
But the data, the academia, does not support this hypothesis. It just doesn't. And it's not because the anti-migration people don't have academia. They do. They have money. They have resources. The CMC, Matthew Goodwin, the basket weavers. If they wanted to do the academic work and prove that hypothesis, they could do that. But they don't do that. Instead, they misinterpret numbers and post these crazy figures about migrant crime.
Foreigners are committing loads of crimes in Britain and the establishment can't cover it up anymore. Foreigners were convicted of a quarter of all crimes in Britain last year.
But this is a major problem, right? Because you see how I just had to spend ages right there talking through these long, boring numbers, reports, reading through them, your eyes are glazed back. Wait, pay attention. But look at this sexy headline. Ooh. Foreign nationals commit 40% of SA in London. It's so clean, man. One sentence. It's so easy to remember. You can repeat it next time you're in a debate at the pub. You can pull this bad boy out. That right there is the power of these dark think tanks. And look, I do not blame people. People are not bad people if they believe these numbers. I don't think they're racist, like in their heart, inherently. They are being told these numbers in what seems like good faith. And if these numbers were true, if this data was true, I too would join the anti-migrant crowd. And I did. For some time I did, because I used to believe this data. And I spent all that time on just 2 of the arguments. Every single day you hear these things. They are pumped out constantly. And it takes all of that time to fact check them. And because of this wave of misinformation, the public's perception of immigration has completely changed because things like these fill them with fear and has brought immigration into the forefront of political discourse. 100% of our energy is about immigration right now. And so what we really need to do is work out who the fuck are pushing these messages. The Center for Migration Control, who is it? And what the fuck do they want? Now, look. I am not the smart bro here, right? I didn't do all of that debunking. God help me, I did not do that. I'm good at waving my hands and chatting shit. The work done into debunking those statistics were these two legends on TikTok, Lewis Aaron and Sneaker. I'll link them below. Please go support them and help them. Because yes, that is right. Two TikTokers, unlike the entire media establishment, actually bothered to click on these reports and read them. Like this one. Record number of migrants in the UK are not in work. Which, if you click on the report, the button doesn't work. But that didn't stop the media sharing it. If we look at the Center for Migration Control's About Us page, you will see no team listed. Or any evidence that there is a team. They're listed under a trading name of Athelney Campaigns Limited. Athelney being the name of the town that King Alfred fought off foreign invaders and saved Britain from them. Which is, you know, obviously it's just a coincidence. If you look them up on Companies House, you'll see they were set up in March of 2024. With one name, the director, Robert Bates. From everything that is made public about them, them is actually he, him. That was a woke joke. I am sorry. So yeah, it seems to be one guy, old Robbie Bates. And we don't know who he is. We don't know where he's from. We don't know where or if he went to school, if he's got any academic credentials. And we don't know who's funding him. But people have dug into him, and the first ever piece of evidence that this man even exists on the internet was a TV interview he did in 2017 on the state-owned propaganda channel called RT, also known as Russia Today, who have since been banned from broadcasting in the UK.
Should we not really listen to those alarm bells coming from the EU, that Brexit briefing concerning environmental standards, workers' rights, even, of course, people are suggesting that Brexit could cause cancer?
Oh, it's almost as if the EU's trying to make Brexit look like a bad thing. Surely they wouldn't be saying that, considering that we'll be taking with us our vast amount of funding, you know, our input to what the European Union actually is. Surely they wouldn't, like, present it as a negative in any way, would they? No, it's all negotiating bluster.
He went on Would You Believe It, GB News a bunch of times, and even managed to appear in an undercover expose from Channel 4, where it was found out that he is a senior campaigner for Reform UK.
And Rob Bates is a senior Reform campaigner. And then there's a discussion about campaign spending limits.
In a short campaign, you've got, I don't know, 20 grand or whatever it is, the figure. Well, yeah, we've spent double that already, don't we? 20 grand.
In said footage, he claimed that Reform had spent double the legal limit during their campaign, which he claimed later was just a joke. And he said this while stood next to another guy who was saying things like this.
The car has a pride flag on its bonnet.
You see that degenerate flag on the front bonnet? What the old Bill doing promoting that crap? He's about catching nonsense, not promoting the in the car.
Fucking sick jokes, dudes. So yeah, Rob, just a guy, sat in a room, presumably with a laptop, just anti-migrant propaganda farming. Much of the British elite class, politicians, media, journalists, just seem to have gobbled everything he reports up uncritically. Look, you might hear all that and think, yeah, fair enough, this sounds like bullshit. Maybe you might even feel a little bit more skeptical next time you hear some stat about how kebab shop owners called Abdul are 100 times more likely to leave the toilet seat up. You might now question some of this, but your belief hasn't gone, it hasn't changed because of one very important scandal in particular. An undeniable scandal that really did take place, that we know did happen for a fact. The Grooming gang scandal.
The Prime Minister will be urged to launch a new national inquiry into grooming gangs in a report due next week, directly linking the issue to men of Pakistani origin.
It has been claimed that children between the age of 9 to 14 were being trafficked for prostitution on an industrial scale.
The Grooming gang scandal, man, sometimes I hate making these videos because this stuff, it's horrific. And when you talk about it the way I am, just in numbers and data, it really dehumanizes it. These are real events that really happened and really ruined people's lives. But very sadly, this tragedy has become weaponized in the political arena. So we have to do it, right? I've covered grooming gangs before in the past, but since then there has been some update to it, which was the Casey review. So I'm sure you know about this topic, right? It's the claim that Pakistani men commit disproportionate amounts of a crime known as grooming gangs. Now, for a long time, what was hard about coming to this conclusion was that it was very hard to get accurate data for grooming gangs because it was never an official police category of crime. When people tried to look into this and report on it in the early days, a lot of these reports used very different definitions of what a grooming gang was. Some would put emphasis on the location where they were groomed, being outside of the home, so in a park, in cinemas, in the streets, at friends' houses. Those sorts of definitions would exclude people who were groomed online, people trafficked into the country, or peer-on-peer abuse. Many of the different reports mentioned that these crimes took place very often in places like taxis and takeaways. Some of the reports put an emphasis on the gang mechanism, 2+ offenders, and some would distinguish gangs separate from looser groups and individual perpetrators. Some other definitions required that the groomers used gifts like drugs and alcohol. Some didn't include that. Most of these reports focus heavily on female victims and less on male victims, largely because young boys don't tend to come forward to report these crimes. And so across all these sort of different reports that use different definitions, there was a sort of trend that seemed to be emerging that showed different levels of representation of different racial groups. The first big one was the Quillian report, 2017. It said that 85% of these grooming gangs were Pakistani men.
The Quillian Foundation study found that 84% of all people convicted since 2005 for the specific crime of gang grooming, as opposed to abuse by individuals, were Asian, as our North of England correspondent Sally Lockwood reports.
It's a problem that's plagued several UK cities. Gangs of predominantly British Pakistani men targeting vulnerable white young women and girls.
This one, again, was spread all across the media, uncritically whilst it hadn't been peer-reviewed. And then, people delved into it, and the report was bullshit. They quietly shut down and removed the report. I did a whole explanation of this in the other video, but basically they didn't even tell you where they got their data from. They literally just said, trust me, bro. So this one is very discredited at this point, but for some reason, the expert in grooming gangs, Tommy Robinson, still quotes this report to this day, as recently as 9 months ago in this video with Tyler Oliveira, which got millions of views and was not fact-checked, just assumed to be true.
Now, when we see the statistics that we have in the UK, Muslims make up 5% of the UK population. They're responsible for 90% of the convictions of groups of men that young kids. Why? Why isn't it Sikhs? Why aren't the Jews doing that? Why aren't the Hindus doing that? Why is it the Islamic community? 30% of the men convicted of gang rape of children are called Muhammad.
So anyway, all these different reports and the poor collection of data that didn't give us any sort of conclusive takeaway led to the Casey review in 2025, which concluded that in 3 specific police constituencies, there is a local overrepresentation of Asian/Pakistani men in group-based CSA. In Greater Manchester, it was shown that they're 3.1 times as likely. Rotherham showed that they were 16.5 times as likely. And West Yorkshire, 2.2 times. And the Casey review updated the conclusion, which said, due to this really inconsistent data recording from the police forces, the previous claim that was made that white men are the most likely to be involved in grooming gangs, which was what the 2020 report concluded, is misleading. Because, literally, we don't have the data to prove that. Because ethnicity wasn't recorded in 2/3 of the cases. Now look, there's many different ways we could talk about this, but I'm going to use an example. Now this doesn't seem to get as much news, but you might have heard that in the UK, there was a number of CSA scandals in the Catholic and the Protestant churches. A few notable cases would be Ealing Abbey and St. Benedict's School, Archdiocese of Westminster, Archdiocese of Birmingham, Diocese of Chichester, Bishop Peter Ball. If I was to ask you honestly, in the British Protestant, the British Catholic Church, in these cases that happen, do you think there's potentially an overrepresentation of white British perpetrators? Would it be crazy to assume that white British people might be overrepresented in that type of crime? No, probably not. But the conclusion you would make here wouldn't be that it's because white British men are more likely to do that. But the conclusion you would make is, well, it's because white men are more likely to be in the clergy in the UK than other minority ethnic groups. Now, if we bring this back to grooming gangs, if we use the generally agreed upon definition of grooming gangs, there is a key focus on these crimes taking place outside, in streets, at night, in taxis and takeaways. The Casey review tells us that 70% of group-based offenders were employed in the nighttime economy. Close your eyes, in your head right now, if I tell you to picture a taxi driver or a late night takeaway worker, probably you picture someone who isn't white. And you wouldn't be inaccurate. The largest ethnic group of taxi drivers in the UK are Asian or Asian British at 42.1% as of 2024. As well, foreign-born workers in the UK make up 23.1% of night shift, nighttime economy workers. Now, with that in mind, do you suspect that a crime that in nearly every single report mentions a core part of it is that it takes place in the nighttime economy with taxis, takeaways? Do you think it's possible that there might be an overrepresentation of Asian men in those crimes? Possibly. I mean, again, we don't have the whole data on this, but possibly it could be the case. In certain areas, maybe. And it's what the Casey review evidence sort of points towards. However, with all of that said, Baroness Casey herself mentioned specifically, if you zoom out of this specific crime of grooming gangs, which makes up 0.6% of all CSA allegations, we will see that white men commit the majority of all CSA. When we look at the data for people in prison for CSA, we will see that they are roughly in alignment with their size as a percentage of the population.
And of course, so if you look at the data on child exploitation suspects and offenders, it's disproportionately Asian heritage. If you look at the data for child abuse, it is not disproportionate and it is white men. So again, just note to everybody really outside here rather than in here, let's just keep calm here about how you interrogate Gator and what you draw from it.
So with all that in mind, if we do go and do a national review and we come to the conclusion there is an overrepresentation of Asian men in grooming gangs, the question we would ask wouldn't be why do Asian men commit more CSA than white men? Because from what the data tells us isn't the case, they don't commit more. The question would be why, when they commit crimes against children, do they do it as a group more than white men? Which is a very different claim than what some people make. Now, this whole scandal, right, was really a showcase of the failure of the British state to firstly record data correctly, secondly to just dismiss many of the victims of the grooming gangs who came forward but were pretty much dismissed because they were working class people. There was quotes like that the bad girls going after bad boys. There was also claims that they feared being seen as racist if they were to report an ethnicity. They even, in some cases, they even convicted the children as child prostitutes.
And then they arrested you and charged you. So you not only were you a victim of these awful men, a victim of the system, you then became a victim of the criminal justice procedure. That to me is evil.
This whole thing was a massive failure. It had a devastating impact on victims' lives and also allowed for this to become weaponized in politics as part of this story that Pakistani men or foreigners at large come in here and assaulting our women and children, all whilst being protected by the British state. And there's a lot of real genuine problems and things we did wrong in this situation. But when we look at the world of politics and the media, and we look at what are they proposing is the solution to grooming gangs, it seems to be, I don't really know. It seems to be maybe stop the boats, which doesn't make any sense because the boats really escalated. It was sort of started in 2017. Many of these grooming gang cases are from the 90s and 2000s. It's a very strange solution. If the goal is for us to protect the women and children, when in 2022, 87% of perpetrators were white British, despite being 75% of the population, and the fact that in one of the reports, we had 20 recommendations given to the Tory government that were specifically designed to safeguard people against grooming gangs. However, the Tories did none of these recommendations. Not only that, the hypocrisy goes further. Over the years, the Tories have implemented major cuts that resulted in the underfunding and sometimes shutting down of women and children refuge centres, the places designed to protect these people from these crimes.
But with funding cuts by local authorities, charities claim many of these safe houses now face closure.
It's difficult to get a measure of how many women are being turned away, but for an example, on just one day last summer when we did a survey of our members, 155 women and 103 children were turned away from the first refuge they approached. And that's a real problem, and it suggests that we might be going back to the dark ages of the 1970s where there was nowhere that women could flee to escape domestic violence.
31% was literally cut of the domestic violence and sexual abuse services. And that is not all. I don't have the time to go through it. I'll flash them all up on the screen, all of the cuts that have been made to those sorts of things. So it becomes really curious, right, when you hear this argument about protecting the women and children, especially when we see people rioting and protesting migrant hotels when a refugee gets convicted or accused of SA, because there has been literally zero riots when it came to grooming gangs of white men. I'll flash some of them on screen. And especially when 2 in 5 of those arrested in those hotel riots were convicted of domestic abuse. And it's all because this topic, right, of the grooming gangs has really been taken far, far away from the idea of actually trying to protect our women and our children. And instead it's being used to allude to something else. Something about the problems of Asians or their culture or Islam, because we know Pakistanis are often Muslim, and in the previous data we also know that Afghans are predominantly Muslim. We're being told it must be Islam, it must be Muslims. So let's do it, let's look into it. Is Islam the problem? Are Muslims integrating into Britain? Are they eroding British culture? So I hear this argument a lot that Britain doesn't feel like Britain anymore, that our culture is changing too quickly. And it's a tricky one because people make this argument from very different places, different perspectives. And I think for some, it has to do with a perception of Islam. They look around at the world and they see how different people live, and they see that in some places in the Muslim world, they force women to cover themselves up, to wear the niqab. They stone gay people. And these are attitudes, they're opposed to our progressive liberal attitudes. And they paint a picture of some Muslims having a backward culture. And we'll talk about it, but it is curious that if you look at the CMC's data, you know, that whole foreign people doing more crime, blah, blah, blah. The top 5 nationalities they've listed here, they say are more likely to commit SA in the UK. At the top is Afghanistan, which we know is Muslim. Underneath it, they have Eritrea, which is half Muslim, but also half Christian. Namibia, overwhelmingly Christian. Chad is majority Muslim, but has a big Christian population. Moldova is almost entirely Christian. But yeah, I think because Afghanistan's at the top and people don't really know that about those other countries, they come away and maybe just think all these places are Muslim majority countries. Religion isn't what these countries have in common, but there is something they do have in common. And that is that they are run by dictatorships, by warlords, by military juntas.
So there were only Taliban with their turbans, with their guns, and with their cars, and they were running everywhere. People were scared. They were all scared of the situation and were running to the airport. And I was also thinking that what can I do? How can I get out?
Think about it, right? If you are fleeing from a dictatorship as a refugee, which is a very common reason why people become refugees, how likely do you think that that dictatorship was like some hyper-progressive wonderland? Are we really expecting the Taliban to have their pronouns in the bio? Is a dictator going to be manifesting girl boss energy when they're firing up the torture camps? No, obviously not. They enforce regressive norms on their people, on women, on gay people, on minorities, because that is how these regimes stay in power. Refugees don't come from progressive democracies because progressive democracies don't create refugees. They come from places where human rights are being violated and crushed by the state. And it really strikes at the core. It's a core deep belief, which I consider part of British culture, is the belief in asylum seeking. And so if you deny these people refuge, then we're hitting a real core argument here, a real deep argument, which is, do you believe in the concept of refugees? Which to me UAE is part of Western British cultural democracies. In World War II, we made it an international right because of people fleeing Nazi Germany. We weren't scared of Jewish people coming here because they were going to bring Nazism with them. They were fleeing that regime. If we only believe in the idea of refugees if they come from a progressive country, then we don't believe in the idea of refugees, which to me goes against British cultural values. Now look, with that in mind, I do completely understand that people are basing some of this opinion on data. When you poll British Muslims on their attitudes to certain social issues, there are some worrying attitudes. We can't dodge that. There was a poll that Channel 4 run from 2016, which is a decade old, bear in mind. But it did show back then that 52% of British Muslims thought that homosexuality should be illegal. 39% agreed that a woman should always obey their husband. 31% believed that polygamy was acceptable. And about 4% expressed sympathy for people who carried out violence against those who insulted Islam. But here's the thing about these attitudes, right? And this is a well-known, understood phenomenon, is that younger generations don't hold the same views as their parents. The younger generations, their attitudes change. When you poll young British Muslims on economics, their attitudes and their worries, fears about what's bothering them in their life, their attitudes are nearly identical to the British population. And we can see really clearly already just how different support for gay marriage is from the young generation as opposed to the older generations. With the oldest being +10 in favour of making homosexuality illegal, but the 18 to 35 age group being -8% in favour of banning homosexuality. When it comes to identity, 93% in that old survey said that they feel that they belong to Britain. As well as this, young British Muslims have a very high rate of participation in university. And that's important because universities is where people integrate into British culture. Universities, workplaces, cultural settings, this is where liberal values are the norm. And when they're in those settings, those values will shift accordingly. And just, you have to think for scale, right? We talk about these liberal values as if we've always had them. We haven't. Just in the 90s, a majority of British people believed that homosexuality should be illegal. People's attitudes can and will change over time. The common and consistent trend, which has been seen through all historic groups of migrants, is that their cultural attitudes over generations will become in line with the mainstream British culture. This was the exact same for Black Caribbean people in the 70s, the exact same for Irish Catholics in the 70s. Both of which, back then, people would say they will never assimilate into our culture. It's exactly the same. But even with all this, there is still this fear, and maybe this is quite a minority opinion, but there is this fear that Muslims will one day take over Britain and overthrow our Western values. So let's just run the numbers on this. Can that feasibly happen? Is my son going to be called Mohammed, and am I no longer allowed bacon butties? So let's just say, right, that somehow, let's pretend that British Muslims, despite all evidence, all historic precedents, somehow just never change their attitudes and they stay as they are. And we consider, could we one day have Sharia law in Britain?
And the one that really I thought was perhaps most worrying of all, that 32% of British Muslims want to see Sharia law implemented in the UK. I find this genuinely terrifying. And I say that because the Muslim population of Britain is 4 million today. By 2050, it's projected to be over 10 million. Are we to have a huge group of millions of people living in our midst that not only don't share our values, but in many ways would like to impose their values on us?
There's even polling that says that 32% of Muslims want Sharia law in Britain. Now, bear in mind, there's lots of argument and different perceptions of what Sharia law means amongst Muslims, but let's just take it in the worst faith way possible. Your wife has to wear a niqab, you gotta throw stones at gay people, right? We'll take it in the worst faith. And let's play this out, right? So let's remember, there are 3.9, basically 4 million Muslims in Britain. They are 6% of the population. 32% of that 6% see Sharia law as somewhat/very desirable, which would put the overall number about 1.3 million, which is 1.9% of the UK population. And remember, we know how politics works, right? That is 1.3 million spread all around the country, different constituencies who do not all have the exact same beliefs, values, political opinions. And if we just look at British Muslims' voting history, they have consistently, since the 90s, voted for the more progressive party. That's not because they're progressive, but we're going on feasibility here. Also, that data is immigrants who don't have the legal right to vote in this country. And we also know in Britain, not everyone actually uses their right to vote. In 2024, in the last election, we just had one of the lowest turnouts in a long time in all age groups of just 60%. Why I'm saying all of this, why I'm going into these numbers so much, is because that's what you have to do. You have to dig into these numbers. And the more and more you do that, the likelihood of a few 100,000 Muslims who support Sharia law in a wider British population of 70 million people somehow organizing and pushing Sharia law through our electoral system is logistically impossible. I mean, for fuck's sake, we can't get rich people to pay more tax. And that has a 75% approval rating. And I know exactly what you're going to say. I know what you're thinking right now. You're going to say, what if that Muslim population becomes bigger? And I know exactly what report you will cite. You will report Matthew Goodwin, who says that white British will become a minority in 2063. This report and old conspiracy theories has led some people to this belief of demographic replacement, that white people are being replaced by Muslims and foreign people because we are choosing to have less children.
Isabel, let's talk about this report, this forecast, very alarming. Research by Professor Matt Goodwin at Buckingham University. He predicts that within 40 years, white British people will make up the minority of the population of this country.
This report from Matthew Goodwin, firstly, makes massive assumptions about future immigration levels, about future immigration birth rates. Birth rates all around the world are dropping right now, and migrant birth rates tend to drop in alignment with the native population over time. On top of this, the actual claim is that white British people will be a minority in 2063. But you gotta think about what's being said there. Not all of the non-white people are like one homogenous group, right? No, they're all broken down into much smaller minority groups. So white British people, even based on this dubious data, would still be the majority ethnic group. And, you know, as a side, they're sort of implying that all non-white British people are not British. I'm not saying Matthew Goodwin's saying that, but it's, you know, some people will take that from this. And even in this very alarmist report, it concludes that the Muslim population in Britain would still only be 11.1% in 25 years. It's like, this matters. Scale, context matters. Because when you have people who see Muslim communities as not integrating, and in turn meaning that they must hate our values and that they are a threat to us, a lot of it is based on these types of reports and very fear-mongering headlines and cherry-picking the religious texts for problematic verses, which you can pretty much do in every religion ever. I'm a Christian, but if you want to make Christianity look bad, all you got to do is go through the Bible and find some verses. But that isn't what religion tends to serve as in the real world. There are very few people who are literalists and fundamentalists. For most, it's a personal, spiritual, and a communal thing. It offers people some guidance, stability, and security in a crazy world. And to me, this really touches on something deeper, much deeper. When we're scared of this idea of losing our liberal British values I believe in, you probably believe in, incredible values that have been hard fought for, you have to ask, what creates illiberal attitudes? So obviously, the main thing people will point to is fundamentalist Islam, the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, all these well-known groups who did terrorist attacks and have done awful, terrible things. It's really interesting to look into what created the rise of fundamentalist Islam. It hasn't always been like that. It became radicalized. We can take Iran, for example. In 1953, we, Western democracies, overthrew their democratically elected leader directly because he wanted to nationalize Iran's oil supply so that they owned it and we didn't own it.
The CIA has released documents that show its role in the 1953 coup. That is the coup that toppled Iran's democratically elected prime minister. Mohammad Mossadegh had moved to nationalize oil production in Iran. Well, the U.S. was concerned at the time that that would mean a victory for the Soviets in the Cold War.
So what we did was led a coup through our intelligence agencies to overthrow their democratically elected leader and replace him with a monarch, the Shah of Iran. Now, the Shah of Iran was interesting because although he was a monarch, a dictator, he styled himself as like a modernizer, aligning closely with Britain and America. And he came in being a big lib, you know, the liberal aesthetics, the rhetoric. He had women driving cars. Wow. However, whilst that's great, you know, women, cars, brilliant, poverty, inequality, and corruption just were ignored, whilst the Shah brought in a secret police force to crush political opposition. And slowly what happened was a political backlash. A backlash that wasn't just against the Shah himself, but against everything that he represented. Western liberalism, secularism, women's rights, free expression, all of it was rejected. As to many people, those values were seen as inseparable from the corrupt system that they lived under. To many, the West became synonymous with dictatorship, exploitation, and humiliation. And so, reactionary, authoritarian, radical Islam took root there, and this story repeated many places around the world. But the thing is, these authoritarian regimes, as we know, are awful, and they became worse and worse, more radicalized, as they took more and more power without any democracy to show opposition. They took away people's rights, they treated people terribly, all to maintain power. And so it created a refugee crisis of people running away from them en masse. Conflicts that we were directly involved with: Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen. This destabilization of the Middle East created the refugee crisis that we are dealing with right now. And we love in the liberal West to take the high ground, to point at the Middle East and say, look how backward these people are. Look how they rejected liberalism. However, I would argue right here, right now, we are sleepwalking into the exact same thing.
Vast majorities of people, including women, the women didn't receive the right to vote until the 19th Amendment.
And then we fixed that.
I don't think that was a good thing.
You would ban voting for women globally?
Globally? If I could.
Think about it. What is MAGA, if not the beginning of the exact same process? Think about it. Decades of neoliberal economics, which painted itself as caring and compassionate, liberal. We became progressive. We gave people more rights. All of that was great, but the economics failed. It gutted communities. Wages flatlined. Towns were hollowed out. And what has filled the vacuum? This new movement, which is increasingly telling people to forget liberalism, forget democracy. Let's go back to strong men and traditional values. It tells people that liberalism is what has failed you. Feminism has failed you. Multiculturalism has failed you. Farage looks around the world and he refers to Putin as the world leader he admires the most. And that Andrew Tate is a role model for young men.
What is it about the murderous dictator as an operator that you admire?
How many years has he been in power? You know, he's gone from prime minister to president. He's a clever political operator.
Tate was a very important voice for an emasculating. That's almost what you're being told. Masculinity is something we should look down on.
They're telling us that what we need is hierarchy, authority, real men in charge. And it is scarily similar to how radical Islam framed itself as the cure to Western corruption. You see, when liberalism alone promised to bring a better life, but failed to deliver for ordinary people, for some, the reaction is to just burn it all down and embrace authoritarianism instead. Now look, yeah, I'm sorry. I got carried away there. It's pretty dramatic, but I just think it's important that we don't do that. But with all that said, I really want to make a last point. That last point being when people say that Britain no longer feels British. You know, it's kind of vague, but I feel like people are generally referring to maybe the high street. Some shops might look different. Maybe the vibe's different. The people, some of them look different than what you might have remembered growing up. And it is very important to bear in mind that the changes to towns via immigration can happen quite fast. If you have large waves of immigration, that change can happen suddenly. And to some communities in some places, that will create a feeling of a lack of control, feeling that they don't have a say in that decision or a say over their community in general. And like, you know, I think some of it's true. I think, yeah, we don't really have a lot of say over what happens in our communities. Some people will point to immigration specifically. And yeah, if you're living in a struggling town, changes from immigration can be really visible. And the reason being is because immigrants will typically move to areas that are cheaper to rent, poorer areas. Often they'll create diasporas of their immigrant community, and more will move there because it becomes easier to get a job because you know people and you're used to them. Now, generally what happens with these diasporas is over time, the kids will move out as they get older and accumulate more wealth. They move out around Britain, and that is the process of integrating into wider British culture. But because migrants typically are poorer than natives when they arrive into the country, they tend to cluster in low-cost housing, which means that poor areas can demographically change much quicker. And yeah, it will look more foreign. It will look different than what you're used to. But when people decry things like multiculturalism has failed, it's not a full picture at all, because it's a very different picture when we look at a place like London. And I know there's lots of people in the media that don't want to believe this, but In London, high quality multiculture is everywhere. People love it. People travel all around the world to go to London. It is an amazing place. If you go and have a day out in Notting Hill, tell me it wasn't an amazing time. You have different food, different music, different communities from all around the world. Sharing, it creates these fusions of cuisine, these communal events, and a real feeling of life in an area. Chinatown is celebrated. Camden, Borough Market, Notting Hill, Islington. If you go and walk around these areas, it's very multicultural. But the key difference here is that many of these places are middle class. They are wealthier. They can afford to do multiculture better than poor communities.
You do get some people who say places like this, they don't integrate, they're different, they're living parallel lives. You know, some things are just about convenience. If you're a Muslim and you want halal meat, you're going to live somewhere like this where you can get it here. If you're someone who wants a pint, you probably might not live here because there's not many pubs here. Now that doesn't mean we hate each other, it just means it's convenient.
I used to work up there, so I didn't go deep into it very often, but I would like walk from about here there. So when I first came there, I was intimidated in the sense that it was alien. Like, I can't say it wasn't alien. But then over a while, you're like, they are just normal people. I got into Tommy Robinson after, and I remember him talking about Berry Park, and I remember even thinking, listening to him, I was like, Berry Park's not bad, it's quite nice. When I'm sort of walking around Berry Park, I'm seeing it feels like community. Like, it feels like, you know, this is where...
What have you got?
You want to smell good?
I want to smell good. I want my missus to
love you.
Yeah, love you.
What do you think about Luton?
Luton, beautiful.
Yeah? What makes it beautiful?
People, the people. Helpful, good people, helping each other.
So some people say this area is a no-go zone for white people, that there's no mixing of cultures.
Nah, no chance. Why? I'm from Iraq. People look at us in the wrong ways. They see what's happening in the media, some other places that believe in war or something, they think all the Muslims are the same. No, don't listen to what people say. You know, when you listen to somebody, you know, and you follow, then you're a sheep.
There you go, brother. Nice to meet you, man.
Have a good day, guys. Yeah, God bless you. Have a good day. God bless you guys.
This sort of high street versus our high street is a shopping centre.
Yeah.
Only chains. And it's like no one wants to be there.
It is a success story, and it's not one that you often hear.
Poor towns are exactly that. They are poor, they are struggling, they lack resources. Often if you see a foreign food shop, it won't look as nice as something in Notting Hill, and it will look different. And for some, that dramatic change over time can feel jarring. And there are people that are jumping on this decline of high streets, which I've covered in another video, and pointing to multiculturalism as the problem. I saw this video pop up the other day which said, Rochdale is a third world country. And in this video, the guy goes up and interviews like a lot of homeless people, and they're all white. And you can see that they are being told that the problem is foreigners.
Oh, you spoke English up there, you alright, mate? They sell you all drugs? Yeah, the Asian lot?
Them,
of course they do. Of course they do. Are you fall from Deepcliff?
Trying to kill us all, slowly.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. Are you getting much help?
Not really, no.
There's not much help if you're white British anymore, is there?
Yeah.
Not much fucking help. What
you
bring...
come in with a foreign fucking name, you get everything.
Yeah, I got an idea. Go over to France, come back over on a banana boat, on a rubber dinghy, yeah, that allows you. They put all the immigrants in the McDonald's, haven't they?
You know, I bet they have. They're making it as well.
They fucking have. What do you think? Has it changed over the course of time, Rochdale, in the years you've lived here? Has it changed?
Oh, it's changed a hell of a lot.
Would you prefer it to go back to how it used to be?
Yeah, the old cotton mills, the old pubs where you can, you know, get a decent drink.
Rochdale's decline started in the 1980s when the Arkwright mill shut down. Lots of good quality jobs for working class people, and it kept the community alive. There was money flowing around the community. Today, Rochdale is among some of the most deprived areas of England. After years of deindustrialisation and deep council funding cuts, even its main mall closed in 2020. And these people who need help, who are struggling, no one in the political class is really stepping up to help them, but they are using them politically because the grooming gang scandal. All they are telling people is that the problem is migrants. And you hear it in their answers. A lot of these people are saying it's migrants. These people that need financial help are being told that people on boats are getting everything for free. And that the reality is these refugees are at the bottom financially of society. They get paid £49.80 a week. Or if they're being housed in a hotel and given food, they only get £9 a week. When people say that they're being given phones, most of them are being given by charities. They are being put in hotels because they're being left in limbo for 2 years for their asylum application to be approved, in which time they're not legally allowed to work. And when they are eventually approved and they might get some housing, they are thrown in the most low quality HMO properties they can so that the private companies that are handling the refugee crisis can make as much money as possible. And like, for scale, hotel refugees are just the tiniest proportion of our population. It's like 0.05%. Supporting refugees, which I would say is a good thing to do, costs just 4.7 billion. It's about 0.38% of total public spending. The hotels thing is a problem. It's not ideal. It's not good. We should fix it. But to think that this is the #1 problem in our society right now is almost hilariously obvious that it's a divide and conquer tactic. Because the deeper argument is, yes, the people in Rochdale and those homeless people in those videos need more help from the government. Yes, they do. We should look after them more. We should do more. But financially, it doesn't need to be one or the other. It's estimated that it would cost us 1.9 billion to end homelessness in the UK. However, after years of relentless propaganda, we have been brainwashed into like this serf mentality to believe there's no money there. There's no money for us and we need to fight for our small breadcrumbs. There is plenty of wealth in this country. We have the 4th most millionaires and the 4th most billionaires in the world. We have plenty of ability to look after our most vulnerable, the homeless, the refugees, etc. And I totally get this idea, like we need to look after our own first. I get where that's coming from. But think about it, the politicians who are making that argument, the anti-migrant politicians, do you ever hear them talking about how they're going to help homeless people? Do they ever talk about investing? Do they ever talk about putting money into those communities? No. They just want you to be angry at the refugee for getting their breadcrumbs. Ultimately, what people are really feeling when they say that British culture is dying, it isn't migration. It is simple economics. Our economy is dying. Muslims didn't close your pubs. Refugees aren't the reason your high street died. Multiculturalism isn't the reason that your town centre now is just gambling shops, vape shops, and American fast food chains. People just have less money, less time to spend with each other, to spend with their community. This is leading to all these third places that are core parts of British identity dying. Whole towns have been stripped of the resources that made them feel alive. Us as the British people, as a community, as a culture, has been atomized into these individuals fighting each other to survive. Meanwhile, on the other side, if you have money, I'm telling you, British culture is alive and thriving. If you have the money, you can live out your quintessential British Cotswold dream. You can regularly go to the West End. You can have your afternoon teas, the village pubs, and Sunday roast by a fire. It's great. It exists. You'll see many videos of rundown high streets, but you never see videos of these places. These exist right now, but you're never going to afford to live there. Look, man, at the end of the day, the elite class want you arguing about halal shops and headscarves. They want you blaming the Afghani while your wages have stagnated. Your rent's doubled and your town centre died. If you listen to the 3 billionaire families that control the entire British media, that's all you're ever going to hear. Or GB News, whose major shareholder, or a Dubai-based investment group set up by New Zealand billionaires that Nigel Farage has a massive stake in. Because to them, it's not about culture. They don't give a shit. They're enjoying themselves. They go to Ascot. They're chilling. For them, it's about control, so they can keep what they have right now. If you're angry at migrants, you're not angry at them. And if we're busy fighting each other, if I'm calling you a racist and you're calling me a wokey, it keeps us divided, and we can never come together to actually fix the actual problems. And it's that right there, that inability for us to come together to fight on the same side, it's that which is going to kill British culture. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to support me on Patreon. It massively helps the channel. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.